My husband died on a Tuesday, and by Friday his family had already divided up everything we'd built together. They were so busy celebrating their victory that none of them noticed the sealed envelope the lawyer kept trying to hand me. 3 months later, they were the ones begging me not to go to the police. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm about to tell you how the worst week of my life revealed a truth so calculated, so perfectly orchestrated, that it took me months to understand I'd been playing a completely different game than everyone else. But first, let me introduce you to the people who thought they'd won. There was David's mother, Patricia, standing in my living room wearing her black Chanel suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary as a dental hygienist, already making lists of which furniture belonged to the family estate. His brother, Marcus, was in the study with his lawyer, a man in a $3,000 suit who kept glancing at his Patek Philippe watch like this was just another Tuesday for him. Marcus's wife, Vanessa, was photographing our art collection on her iPhone, probably already calculating auction estimates. And then there was me, the girl from Sacramento who met David at a community college fundraiser, married him despite his family's barely concealed disappointment, and spent 8 years being reminded at every holiday dinner that I wasn't quite good enough for a Harrington. David had built a commercial real estate empire worth $89 million. Everyone wanted their piece of what he'd created. Everyone except me. I just wanted one more morning waking up next to the man who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday and called me his lucky penny, because I'd been wearing a penny loafer the day we met. That funeral wasn't just about saying goodbye to David Harrington. It was the day I learned that the people smiling in family photos can be the same ones sharpening their knives behind your back, and that sometimes the person you think you know best is actually protecting you in ways you never imagined. My alarm didn't go off that first morning after David died because I never said it. I just lay there in our king-sized bed in our modest 3-bedroom house in Pasadena, staring at the ceiling fan that squeaked on the second rotation, the same squeak David kept promising to fix. The house was quiet in a way it had never been quiet before. David was always up by 6, making calls to the East Coast, his voice drifting up from the kitchen like a familiar song. Our house was nice, but not extravagant, nothing like the mansion Marcus lived in up in Bel Air or Patricia's estate in San Marino. David always said he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. We had a mortgage, a 10-year-old Lexus SUV in the driveway, and furniture from West Elm mixed with some pieces from his grandmother. It was comfortable, real, ours. Being a Harrington meant something in certain Lowe's angel circles. It meant old money, private clubs, and connections that opened doors most people didn't even know existed. David's grandfather had started with industrial properties in the 1950s and built an empire. But David was different from his family. He worked construction jobs in college to understand buildings from the ground up. He met with tenants personally. He actually cared about the people living and working in his buildings. My own parents, Robert and Helen, were solid middle-class people from Sacramento. Dad worked for the Postal Service for 32 years. Mom was a substitute teacher who made the best lasagna in 3 counties. They taught me that character mattered more than bank accounts, that kindness was more valuable than status. They loved David not because he was rich, but because he fixed their garbage disposal without being asked and remembered my dad's birthday every year. They both died in a car accident 4 years ago, and David held me through every tear, every sleepless night, every moment I thought the grief might actually kill me. Patricia never understood why David chose me. She made it clear at our engagement party when she pulled me aside and said, "You seem like a sweet girl, but David needs someone who understands his world." She spent our entire marriage trying to set him up with appropriate women at charity functions, women with hyphenated last names, and trust funds and pictures in the society pages. David would just squeeze my hand under the table and later tell me that I was the only real thing in his life. Marcus was 5 years older than David, and you could see the resentment etched into every interaction. He'd gotten an MBA from Stanford, wore custom suits from London, and ran the family's legacy properties. But David was the one with the vision, the one who'd transformed struggling strip malls into mixed-use developments, who'd seen potential where others saw problems. Every Thanksgiving turned into Marcus's performance review of David's business decisions, dissecting every choice, questioning every strategy. Vanessa, Marcus's wife, came from money herself, old San Francisco wealth. She collected modern art, sat on museum boards, and had never worked a day in her life. She looked at me like I was part of the help, always asking invasive questions about my job at the dental office, her voice dripping with fake interest. "How sweet that you still work," she'd say. "David must love that you're so independent." The heart attack happened in his office on a Tuesday afternoon. David was only 43 years old. He'd been on the phone with a contractor about a project in Culver City, and his assistant found him collapsed behind his desk. They said it was massive, instantaneous, that he didn't suffer. But I suffered. God, did I suffer. The funeral was on Friday at the same country club where we'd gotten married, the Oakmont Club with its manicured lawns and views of the San Gabriel Mountains. I wore a simple black dress from Nordstrom, while Patricia held court in designer morning wear, accepting condolences like a queen greeting subjects. Marcus gave a eulogy about David's business acumen and family legacy. He didn't mention that David volunteered at a literacy program every Tuesday night, or that he cried at every Pixar movie, or that he wanted to adopt kids from foster care, because he believed everyone deserved a family who chose them. After the service, everyone gathered back at Patricia's house, the one with the circular driveway and the fountain and the staff. That's when Marcus pulled out the folder. "We need to discuss the business," he said, and suddenly it wasn't a funeral reception anymore. It was a corporate takeover. David's attorney, Gerald Finch, a man who'd worked with the family for 30 years, sat at Patricia's dining room table with papers spread out like a battlefield. "David's will is straightforward," he said, not meeting my eyes. "The business interests revert to the family trust, managed by Marcus as primary trustee. The Bel Air office building goes to Patricia. The investment portfolio is split between Marcus and Patricia to cover estate taxes." I felt the room tilt. "What about me?" My voice sounded small, foreign. "The house is yours, of course," Gerald said. "And a modest settlement, $200,000. Marcus leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "David was always sentimental. He made sure you'd be taken care of, Sarah. The house alone is worth almost $1 million. You'll be comfortable." 8 years of marriage, 8 years of building a life together, of listening to his dreams, of supporting every risk he took, of being his partner. And I got the house and what amounted to severance pay. "This can't be right," I said. "David wouldn't..." "Wouldn't what?" Patricia's voice cut through my protest like ice. "Wouldn't protect his family legacy, wouldn't ensure the business stayed in Harrington hands. You were married for 8 years, dear. David built his empire over 20. Vanessa was already looking at her phone. "The house is nice, Sarah, very middle-class charm. You could sell it and buy something more appropriate for your income level." That's when Gerald cleared his throat and pulled out a sealed envelope from his briefcase. "There is one more thing. David left specific instructions that this be given to you privately." Marcus grabbed for it, but Gerald held firm. "Privately," I said. "It's addressed to Sarah alone." "What's in it?" Patricia demanded. "I don't know. I was instructed to ensure Sarah received it unopened and that she was to read it alone. Those were David's explicit wishes." Marcus stood up, his face flushing red. "This is ridiculous. We're his family." "If there's something relevant to the estate..." "It's not part of the estate," Gerald interrupted. "It's a personal letter. Sarah, I'd like to schedule a meeting with you, just you, tomorrow, 11 a.m. at my office downtown." I took the envelope with shaking hands. It was thick, heavy, my name written across it in David's handwriting. The sight of those familiar loops and curves made my chest tighten. "This is highly irregular," Patricia said. "David knew how these things should be handled." "Marcus, get our attorney on the phone." I left without another word, clutching that envelope like a lifeline, their voices rising behind me as I walked out of that house, out of their world, back to my car that needed an oil change and had a crack in the windshield I'd been meaning to fix. That night in my empty house, I sat at our kitchen table and stared at the envelope for 3 hours. I didn't open it. Something about the weight of it, the careful seal, the way Gerald had insisted on privacy, it all felt like David was still protecting me from something. I finally understood what David meant when he told me 6 months ago, during one of our late-night conversations over wine on the back patio, that sometimes the most important move is the one nobody sees you making. I made coffee the next morning, David's favorite blend that I'd bought in bulk because I couldn't face the idea of running out, and I drove to Gerald's office in downtown Los Angeles. His firm occupied the 18th floor of a building David's company had renovated 5 years ago. The receptionist recognized me and her eyes filled with sympathy. "Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Finch is expecting you. Conference room 3. Gerald was waiting with another man I didn't recognize, younger, maybe mid-30s, wearing a sharp suit that looked expensive but not showy. "Sarah, please sit down," Gerald said, and there was something different in his voice. Relief, maybe, or anticipation. "This is James Chen, an attorney specializing in estate law and business litigation. He doesn't work for the Harrington family. He works for you." I looked between them, confused. "I don't understand. I didn't hire anyone." "David did," James said. 3 years ago, he retained me specifically to represent your interests in the event of his death. I've been on retainer this entire time, waiting." Gerald slid the envelope across the table to me. "Before you open this, I need you to understand something. What I told Marcus and Patricia yesterday, that was the will David filed with the family. But that's not the only will David had. What you're holding is the real one, the one he wanted you to see." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the seal. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a letter in David's handwriting. The second was a legal document, pages and pages of dense text. The third was a USB drive. I read the letter first, and David's voice filled my head like he was sitting right next to me. "Sarah, my lucky penny. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I'm so sorry I couldn't explain this to you while I had the chance. I'm sorry for a lot of things, actually. For the secrets, for the performance we had to maintain, for every time my family made you feel small, and I couldn't tell you why I needed you to endure it. Here's what you need to know. 3 years ago, I discovered that Marcus had been embezzling from the company. Not small amounts. Over the course of 8 years, he'd siphoned off $12 million through fake vendor accounts, inflated contracts, and a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. I found the evidence while reviewing some acquisition documents. Every spreadsheet, every transfer, every fake invoice. My first instinct was to go to the police immediately. But then I thought about what that would do to my mother, who already lost my father to a scandal years ago. I thought about how it would destroy everything our grandfather built. And I realized that Marcus wasn't just stealing money. He was gambling it away. I hired a private investigator and learned that my brother had a gambling addiction that started in college and never stopped. He was into loan sharks for amounts that could get him killed. The money he stole kept him alive, but also kept him trapped. So I made a choice. I confronted him privately. I told him I knew everything, that I had evidence that could send him to prison for 20 years. And I gave him an option. Stop immediately, enter treatment, and work to pay back every cent, or I'd turn everything over to the feds. He agreed. I set up a payment plan that would take 15 years to complete, money coming out of his dividends and salary, disguised as business expenses and consulting fees. I was routing it into a separate account, one nobody knew about. But here's what I didn't count on. 3 years into this arrangement, I started getting chest pains. I saw a cardiologist who told me I had a genetic heart condition, the same one that killed my father. He gave me medication, told me to reduce stress, and basically said I was a ticking time bomb. That's when I realized I needed a different plan. I couldn't let Marcus inherit control of the company because he'd destroy it within 5 years. I couldn't let my mother continue thinking her family was intact when it was built on lies. And I couldn't let you, the only person I've ever truly loved, become collateral damage in their world. So I built a trap, Sarah. A beautiful, elaborate trap that would only spring after I was gone. The will Gerald read yesterday, that's the fake one. I made sure Marcus and my mother saw exactly what they wanted to see. They think they won. They think the empire is theirs. But here's the truth. Over the last 3 years, I've been quietly restructuring everything. The company they think they're inheriting. It's a shell. I moved all the real assets, all the valuable properties, all the actual wealth, into a new corporation that exists solely in your name. It's all in the legal document attached to this letter. Every building, every contract, every asset worth having, I transferred it piece by piece through legitimate business transactions that look like normal operations. Marcus gets to run a company that's worth maybe $5 million on paper and has $8 million in debt attached to it. My mother gets an office building that's gorgeous and prestigious and mortgaged to the ceiling. The investment portfolio they're splitting, it's mostly bonds that are about to mature at a loss. You, my love, own everything that matters. $67 million in real estate, all clean, all clear, all yours. The USB drive contains every piece of evidence about Marcus's embezzlement. Bank transfers, emails, fake invoices, everything. It also contains documentation of every legitimate business transaction I made to build your corporation. If they try to challenge the will, if they try to claim fraud or manipulation, James will release the evidence about Marcus. The statute of limitations hasn't expired. He'll go to prison, and the family name will be destroyed in the process. It's mutually assured destruction, and they'll figure that out the moment they try to fight you. I set it up this way because I knew they'd treat you exactly how they did at the funeral. I knew Marcus would gloat. I knew my mother would remind you that you weren't really family. I needed them to show you who they really were so you'd understand why I did this. You might be wondering why I didn't just leave you everything openly. Why all the deception? Because I knew Marcus would challenge any will that cut him out. I knew my mother would claim you manipulated me. This way they can't fight without destroying themselves. This way you're protected. Use the money however you want. Sell the buildings, keep them, start something new. Live the life we always talked about. Travel. Adopt those kids from foster care we dreamed about. Be happy. And know that every single day I spent with you was the best day of my life. You were never my lucky penny because of some cute story about your shoes. You were my lucky penny because you were the only real, genuine, honest thing in my entire world. Everyone else wanted something from me. You just wanted me. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you any of this while I was alive. I'm sorry you had to endure their cruelty one more time. But I promise you, Sarah, this was the only way to win a game that's been rigged since the day I was born. Checkmate. All my love, David. I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face before I could even look up at James and Gerald. Is this real? My voice was barely a whisper. Can he actually do this? James opened the legal document. Every transaction is completely legitimate. David spent 3 years building an airtight structure. He consulted with 5 different law firms, none of whom knew about the others or the full scope of what he was doing. He paid fair market value for every asset transfer. He documented everything meticulously. It's brilliant, actually. The family will can be executed exactly as written because technically, David didn't lie. The business interests do revert to the family trust. It's just that the business is now worthless. Everything of value is in your name through a completely separate corporation that was never part of the estate. Gerald leaned forward. The meeting yesterday, that was theater. I had to play my part so Marcus and Patricia would believe they'd won. David made me promise to maintain the charade until you knew the truth. What happens now? I asked. Now, James said, we file the paperwork. We inform Marcus and Patricia that there's been a comprehensive review of David's affairs and that certain assets were discovered to be in your name through legitimate business transactions completed before his death. We give them the option to accept the situation quietly or challenge it publicly, knowing that any legal challenge will result in the release of evidence that sends Marcus to federal prison.
They'll hate me, I said. They already hate you, Gerald replied. This just gives them a reason that's actually justified. I spent 2 weeks learning the extent of what David had built for me. The corporation was called Pennywhistle Holdings, a private joke about our first meeting that only I would understand. It owned 12 commercial properties across Los Angeles County, all of them cash flowing, all of them managed by teams that had no idea they were working for me instead of the Harrington Family Trust. There was a mixed-use development in Silver Lake that generated $400,000 a month in rent. An office complex in Irvine that was leased to a tech company for another $300,000 monthly. A renovated factory building in the Arts District that housed creative agencies and restaurants. Every single property was valuable, well-maintained, and profitable. David had spent 3 years cherry-picking the best assets, transferring them at fair market value through complicated but legal transactions, and building me an empire while his family thought he was just managing the existing one. James arranged a meeting with Marcus and Patricia at his office. I wore one of my normal outfits, jeans and a sweater from Target, my everyday diamond studs that David gave me for our first anniversary. I wanted them to see that I was still me, still the girl from Sacramento, but now I was the girl from Sacramento who owned their entire world. Marcus arrived in a Brioni suit, radiating confidence. Patricia wore Valentino and her signature Cartier watch. They thought this was a formality, some paperwork to sign, maybe a negotiation about me leaving the house sooner rather than later. James didn't waste time with pleasantries. We need to discuss some discrepancies in the estate valuation, he said, sliding a folder across the table. It appears that over the last 3 years, David transferred significant assets out of the family business and into a private corporation. Marcus barely glanced at it. What kind of assets? All of them, I said quietly. Everything worth having. Patricia laughed. That's absurd. David would never read the documents, James interrupted. Every transaction is detailed. Every transfer was legal, conducted at fair market value, documented with appraisals and board approvals. David built a separate entity and moved the profitable properties into it. What you inherited is the framework of a business with very little actual value. I watched Marcus's face as he read, watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched his hands start to shake. He wasn't stupid. He knew immediately what this meant. This is fraud, he said finally. This is theft. We'll challenge this in court. We'll prove he wasn't in his right mind, that you manipulated. James pulled out another folder. You're welcome to challenge it. But if you do, I'll be forced to introduce evidence regarding the $12 million you embezzled from the company between 2016 and 2019. The federal statute of limitations is 6 years for most financial crimes. That clock hasn't run out. The room went completely silent. Patricia turned to look at her son. What is he talking about? It's a bluff, Marcus said, but his voice cracked. Show her, I said to James. He pulled out a single page, one bank transfer from a Harrington Company account to a shell corporation in the Caymans, dated March 2018, for $400,000, categorized as consulting fees. We have 247 transactions like this, James said. Plus emails, fake invoices, and testimony from David's investigator. If you challenge Sarah's ownership, all of this becomes public record. Marcus goes to prison, the family name is destroyed, and Sarah still keeps the assets because every transaction was legitimate. Patricia's hand was pressed against her mouth. Vanessa looked like she might be sick. David knew, Marcus whispered. The whole time, he knew. He gave you a choice 3 years ago, I said. He could have destroyed you then, but he tried to give you a chance to make it right. Instead, you've spent the last 3 years planning how to cut me out of his life the moment he died. Patricia found her voice. What do you want? I want you to accept reality, I said. I own Pennywhistle Holdings. You own what's left of the family business. We go our separate ways. You tell people David had private investments you weren't aware of. I stay silent about why he made those investments. Everyone moves on. You're blackmailing us, Vanessa said. No, James corrected. We're offering you a choice. Accept the situation quietly, or fight it publicly and lose everything. Including your freedom, Marcus. Marcus looked at me with something I'd never seen before, respect mixed with fear. He really did love you, he said. He burned down everything our family built just to protect you. No, I said. He protected what mattered and let go of what didn't. There's a difference. 3 months after that meeting, I was sitting in what used to be David's office, now mine, looking at a proposal to acquire a struggling apartment complex in Echo Park that could be renovated into affordable housing. Marcus had quietly stepped down from managing what remained of the family business, citing health concerns. He'd entered a treatment program for gambling addiction, paying for it himself. Patricia had sold the Bel Air office building to cover her debts and moved into a smaller house in Hancock Park. She'd stopped calling. Vanessa had filed for divorce, apparently deciding that a Harrington without money wasn't worth the effort. The last I heard, Marcus was working for a property management company, learning the business from the ground up for the first time in his life. Some of David's staff had transferred to work for Pennywistle Holdings. They seemed relieved to be working for someone who actually cared about the properties and the people in them. I'd started a foundation in David's name that provided housing assistance to foster families. We'd helped 12 families so far. My parents would have loved that. David would have loved it too. I'd started the adoption process, ready to become a mother to kids who needed someone to choose them the way David chose me. The house in Pasadena still had the squeaky ceiling fan. I'd decided not to fix it. Some mornings I lay in bed just listening to it, remembering the life David and I built in this modest house that everyone thought was beneath a Harrington. Turned out the house was exactly right. It was everything else that was wrong. Gerald stopped by one afternoon, official business about some paperwork, but really just to check on me. "You doing okay?" he asked. "I'm learning," I said. David left me all these properties, but he also left me a responsibility. I want to do right by them, by the people who live and work in these buildings. He knew you would, Gerald said. That's why he trusted you with all of this. Marcus would have sold everything and spent the money. Patricia would have kept it all as status symbols. You're actually going to make it mean something. That night, I pulled out the USB drive one more time and watched the video file I'd found buried in the folders. It was David, recorded a week before he died, sitting in his office late at night. "Hey, lucky penny," he said to the camera, and I started crying immediately. If you're watching this, then you know everything. You know about Marcus, about the company, about what I built for you. I wanted to record this because I needed you to hear me say something I should have said more often. You changed my life the day I met you. I was so tired of being a Harrington, so exhausted by the performance of it all. And then there you were in your penny loafers and your genuine smile, and you didn't want anything from me except conversation. You didn't know who my family was. You didn't care about the money. You just liked me. Do you know how rare that is? How precious? Every single day with you was the first day I got to be myself. So when I found out about Marcus, when I learned about my heart condition, when I realized I might not have as much time as I thought, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I needed to protect you. Not just financially, though that matters. I needed to protect you from ever doubting that you were the most important thing in my world. My family would have tried to convince you that you were just some girl I married, that the real legacy was the business and the name. I needed you to know that you were the legacy. Everything I built to give to you. Not because you needed it or wanted it, but because you were the only person I trusted to do something meaningful with it. The money doesn't matter, Sarah. What matters is that you understand you were never the outsider they tried to make you feel like. You were the only insider. You were the only one who ever really knew me. Build something beautiful. Live fully. Love deeply. And know that if I could go back and do it all again, I'd still walk into that fundraiser, still trip over my own feet trying to talk to the pretty girl in the penny loafers, still fall completely and totally in love with you.